PDF validation, is it a dream or is it extremely boring? I've heard both opinions, and in the next few slides I'm going to take you through a variety of thoughts, really, about the subject, and the purpose of these slides, much more than to offer a solution. If you came looking for a solution or for some grand business plan that will solve this problem, unfortunately you came to the wrong presentation. I'm not a developer. I like to always remind people at technical conferences and at the ISO committee, ISO 32000 meetings, that I do not write code. So I'm not here to lecture anybody about how they should write code. That is the first and foremost thing that I need to acknowledge. I work in this world much more as a representative of the end user. I don't know too much about writing code. In fact, I know very little about it, maybe nothing at all. I do know what happens to an end user's business decision when they believe in something and then their trust is broken. And PDF relies intensively on the idea of trust. And when that trust is violated by, say, by a corrupt file, because of a creator problem, because of a viewer problem, that trust is damaged, and as a consequence, our industry is damaged. And this is, as an advocate for the industry and for the format, this is something that bothers me. So I'm going to run you through a fast bunch of slides here, and hopefully the fact that I've brought them together relatively recently won't be too blatantly apparent. So this is an example of a PDF. I think it's a PDF. Yes, it's the Camelot PDF. It's written by John Warnock and is displayed by the Chrome viewer. At least this is one of the, says 1.2. I don't know if it's the original PDF file or not. It certainly was the one that was delivered to Planet PDF for hosting on their site back in the day. This is not what you want to have happen when you open up your PDF file in a renderer. And this kind of thing, when it does happen, is what drives people nuts and causes them to delay decisions to invest in PDF technology. So I'm going to speak briefly about the user experience. I mentioned PDF in the ECM industry, how we got here, the costs of bad PDF, how we could go about addressing it, and then to tell you a little bit about an idea called Vera PDF. Users, they experience bad PDF files and or bad software a lot. We'll talk a little bit that in a moment. They blame everyone. They don't know who to blame. So they might blame on the one time, you sent me that file, it must be bad. Or my viewer won't open it, therefore the viewer must be bad. They don't know. As I've mentioned, their trust in PDF and electronic documents in general takes a hit every single time they encounter one of these files. So how significant is PDF? So the PDF Association did a survey of end users in March and April of this year. We attempted to aim the survey at ECM, at people who understand enterprise content management technologies. We did not get what you would call, we got about 65 responses to the survey. It's not what you would call scientific, although I thought it was interesting. So how significant is PDF in your content management, document management systems? Extremely significant. This simply shows us that PDF has been successful at getting into people's systems. The vast majority of their electronic documents are in PDF files. So there's an enormous amount of success that's happened in the world so far for the PDF format. How common are bad PDF files? Well, they're way too common from the point of view of people who are used to being able to trust a piece of paper to record their important business decisions, to be able to share documents with others. 34% of people never worry about paper when they send it via FedEx, when they hand it from one person to another. 34% never think of that, 1% never think of that. In the case of PDF, the news is considerably worse. Do bad PDF files, we ask these users as well, do they cause business problems? Well, a certain number of them, a non-trivial number of them, say yes, bad PDF is not a trivial matter. Bad PDF does indeed result in some significant business issues. We went on to ask them, do differences in the way PDF software behave cause problems? Now this question is a very difficult question for end users to answer. As I previously mentioned, they don't really know what they're talking about as a sort of a technically precise point of view. Nonetheless, the perception is that a substantial number of users find that the variations in the way different kinds of software work with PDF files, or the different experience they get in one kind of a viewer versus another, cause business problems. In the ECM space, the enterprise content management space, we have major players, EMC, IBM, Microsoft with their SharePoint solution, of course, Oracle, Alfresco, many others. And for all of these, or for many of these organizations, for most of their solutions, PDF is addressed by their solutions more or less precisely the same way that TIFF is. It's an object. It has content within it. They don't know if it has one page or many. They don't bother to read the metadata that's associated with that image. They have no idea if there are annotations in it. They also don't know if there are any viruses in it, as it turns out. So PDF is perceived, as I mentioned previously, it's not perceived to be as reliable, as universally supported as one might like. It has no organization, and probably a mistake to refer to W3C here, in the sense that that organization has its interesting situations as well. But nonetheless, it is understood generically and as not part of any vendor to have some sort of a say over what is valid and what is not. So the W3C has a online validator. You can walk up to it and throw your HTML at it, and it'll tell you whether or not the stuff is right. People tend to believe it. The perception, however, in the PDF space is that this is, again, the end user perception, is that Adobe still owns PDF. I read it every single day. People continue to assert that you need a license from Adobe in order to create a PDF file, and so on and so forth. So there's still that perception. Indeed, the icon that installs to your machine still shows the Acrobat logo on it, right? So there's a perception that Adobe owns PDF, that this retards third-party investment in PDF technology, and therefore in this space. How do developers, there's no great perfect way for developers to be sure they've done it right. Certainly Adobe Reader is not a good test for that, because as others have observed, it bends over backwards to be able to display almost anything that is attempting to pretend to be a PDF file. Adobe quietly fixes bad PDF files on the fly. Third-party vendors, those of you, others, are judged in terms of what your software does, what your files do when they encounter Adobe's implementation, and not against the specification per se. This might be okay in other areas. Okay, there are plenty of file formats in this world which are very, very important in this, that, and the other industry, but are not understood generically to be a vital component of business operations, as PDF files are in the legal world, for the justice systems in very many countries, for archivists. Without PDF, some of these people would be back to using TIFF. They have nothing else that they can do. So I would argue that the state of affairs where there's a problem with perceived reliability, the fact that there continues to be, 5 years after standardization of PDF as ISO 32000, there continues to be a perception that Adobe owns the technology, and the fact that it's actually continues to be very difficult to figure out whether or not you've done the right thing or not. These things they might be okay for some small, relatively unimportant file format. They are not okay for the technology which is today and aspires to be tomorrow, the global electronic document format.
Can I make a comment, because I just think it's way too funny?
Yeah.
So you have all these I just think that slide I always think is extremely funny, because you have people who are concerned about PDF's ownership, which is, as we said, for 6 years has now been in the hands of the ISO. But they're okay with TIFF, which to this day remains an Adobe proprietary file format.
People don't know that.
Yeah.
But again, it's a very interesting state of affairs.
Yes, it is, but that's reality. And people don't know TIFF is proprietary because nobody charges, nobody talks about it. They just have to.
But why do they get so obsessed with the idea that PDF might be if they don't even know about TIFF?
Because that's where it came from, and PDF is just coming into this place where it's starting to break out of that old tradition of belonging to Adobe. It's starting to break out of that now. Our company, for one, wants to do everything in PDF and publish everything and give everything to the customers available as PDF, which should help break that out. I myself had
That is a,
The end user doesn't know that.
and that's another large misperception that I'm actually not going to get into here right now. Is most users believe you can't change a PDF too. Yeah, and that's also a problem.
That's what they believe.
It is. So how did we get here? The value proposition for PDF, and this is right from the 91 Camelot paper. I think it's a great encapsulation of why we care about PDF. It allows you to capture documents from any application, send electronic versions of these documents anywhere, and view and print these documents on any machine. However, ISO 32000 doesn't really guide the developer towards creation of high-quality PDFs. It's basically an ingredients list. We have these bits and pieces, these various features and capabilities exist. Go ahead and implement them in PDF if your users need them and if you want to do so. Relatively little guidance on what needs to be done to build a very good-looking or high-functioning PDF. There's some early moves that Adobe took that were critical to the development and to the popularity of PDF, but are coming back to bite us a little bit now. Publishing the PDF reference at the beginning encouraged third parties, of course, to get into the technology. That made it possible for the technology to become very widespread and for people to, in many different areas, to begin to invest in it. Adobe distributed a fantastic viewer, and they did it for free. After a very short period of time, they did it for free. This is also, of course, critical to promulgation of the technology. And finally, as bad or strange or interesting, or however you want to call them, PDF files came out, Adobe very unsurprisingly decided that Reader needed to be able to deal with these files. In the absence of validation, however, it meant that as a practical matter, third parties wound up testing their files against Adobe Reader. And because they would do so and because Reader would eat them, they would decide that, well, it must be good enough for that viewer out there, therefore I'm ready to go ahead and ship my software. And that was the problem. So PDF did indeed take off in printing and government. It became recognized and really, I think, probably grew out from there in many ways. Third parties did indeed begin investing heavily in the space. And as I've said, I talked to my slides, I spoke in front of my slides, but the purpose being that indeed third-party developers began to use Adobe Reader to figure this stuff out. So today, as we've already established, PDF is indeed the world's chosen electronic document format. As I myself have been checking over the last few years, I routinely use Google to just take a very casual look at the proportion of files online that are in PDF versus other formats. PDF consistently hangs out at around 80%, the other ones being PowerPoint, Word, DocX, and so on. It continues as the dominant exchangeable electronic medium for design and print, and nobody has yet come up with a solution that presents all the general electronic document facilities of PDF with all the flexibility of PDF. It's not really on the horizon as yet. So that would all be a great story about PDF, but PDF continues to be a very variable place out there with enormous variations in quality and capability, quality in the files, capability in the software. So what does bad PDF cost us in this industry? Well, the PDF Association conducted 3 surveys. I've already mentioned some of the outcomes of the end user survey. There was also a survey, 2 surveys conducted internally towards members of the PDF Association, and I've selected little bits of data from those surveys to show you right now, give you a sense of the way in which the PDF industry sees this problem for itself. In one question, and to your point, Leonard, this is the only slide of this type that there is. So one of the questions we asked were, we understood, of course, that Adobe Reader is a premier implementation. We wanted to ask the question: what do you developers out there believe? How many files out there in the world do you believe Adobe Reader 10X cannot handle, in the sense that it was willing to display them, but some kind of error will pop up? As you can see, in a relatively significant proportion of developers felt that there would be, even though Reader is as powerful and as capable as it is in terms of defeating or at least handling poorly constructed PDF files, nonetheless, a significant number of those files are likely to generate some sort of error, in the opinion of almost a third of the people who responded to the survey. More concerning, perhaps, to me was when we asked them to guesstimate the overall file quality as they see it. A substantial number of respondents thought the PDF files were getting worse and not better. And when we asked a little bit more closely about this, it had to do, many of them felt that this had to do with the emergence of mobile as a major platform. And those devices which are creating PDF files in that sort of environment are oftentimes using very, very cut down, very stripped down pieces of software to do so. And there's a new generation of bad PDF emerging. And that new generation is stuff it's generated from smaller devices in many cases. And this is a substantial concern, particularly when one, again, connects it with the fact that Adobe is making a reader which is ever more and more capable of dealing with broken files. So in many cases, many users may not know this, but the collection of, they may not experience it as such, but the body of PDF files that are in bad shape or may not parse correctly or may not be searchable or may have many other kinds of problems could very possibly be growing in the world instead of shrinking, which we would otherwise hope. So we also asked, what are the kinds of challenges you have in writing PDF? And so we asked this question in a couple different ways and charted here the responses in terms of those things which were the greatest level of challenge. And as you can see from the numbers here, fonts obviously score the highest. They present the most number of problems for writers, followed by transparency and tagged PDF, and then a number of other issues. How, we asked, do you know that your PDF files that you're writing are good? Unsurprisingly, everybody, one way or another, uses Adobe Reader to check out their files. It may not be the only thing that they use, but they definitely do use it. And about a third say that they use their own validator. A third or so said they use a third-party validator. Interestingly, because I'm the guy who ran the survey, so I got to see the cross-tabulations of the data, but most of the folks who said that they used a third-party validator also said they used their own validator, which I thought was interesting. So other concerns, processing challenges when you're taking in files from elsewhere. Unsurprisingly, again, fonts are a major source of the processing challenges folks are encountering. Type 3 fonts show up quite heavily, as well as does Unicode. But you can see that the issues are spread relatively wide. Interestingly, file structure, dictionaries, content streams, no one who answered the survey said that was a major source of problems. I figured maybe that they thought that, I'm not sure what they thought, but maybe they're just not a problem, or maybe they're just worried that I would embarrass them or something, which is never going to happen. But that's an intriguing point in the context of the syntax validation question. And one thing that's given me some pause as I think about what's the right move, or what are the important things for a validator to be able to do relatively early on. Clearly, if one's talking about the PDF as an entity, one's got to talk about the syntax. On the other hand, it may be that most people are making a reasonably good PDF from the syntax point of view, and that the real problem from an end user point of view may turn out to be fonts, for example, or other sorts of situations. And how to resolve those questions is still, and how to address the subject of a validator in that context is still a good question. Getting into probably the meat and potatoes of why it should matter to a PDF developer as to whether or not PDFs are valid. A substantial number, almost 4 out of 10 developers, said that support requests driven by a failure to process input files are a significant burden. Right? So I presume that if it's if you're in the 5 to 10, and if you're north of 5% of support requests, it might be some sort of burden. You could take that line out of it if you wanted, and you'd have a smaller proportion. The interesting, now, whether once you get bad files in the door, once you start to deal with them, or once you start to become aware of them, in the majority of cases, it turns out developers find that they are prompted by receiving files that give them a problem to enhance their own software. So the long and the short of it is, you get a file that you can't handle. Your characteristic response is you have to go into your own software and start to improve it in order to be able to handle that new flavor of broken PDF file. And that, of course, is something that anybody handling the business side is going to say is a horrible waste of our time. We're really not interested in making our software handle more and more bugs, if at all possible, other people's bugs, not just our bugs, some other guy's bugs. We're fixing our stuff because some other guy is writing bugs. What's wrong with this picture? As a consequence, there is a significant amount of development time lost to accommodating bad PDF files. Fully 30% of the developers responding to the survey said that bad PDF file is a major cost in their in their software development. So the cost of bad PDF it happens in a number of different ways. It's and for some reason missing from this slide is end user perception. Of course, that's something that I've been mentioning earlier in this talk. But for sure, reduced reliability and interoperability, the failure in the attempt to exchange a document, the very basic value proposition of PDF is something that's put at risk by the fact of bad PDF in the world. It clearly increases engineering costs to have bad PDF out there. Others can impose more engineering costs on you because because somebody else starts generating a file that's bad and causes support questions that cause you to need to have to update your own software to accommodate that. And of course, because it increased engineering costs and time, it slows down your ability to rev the product and slows down the time it takes to get that product to market. And probably worst, instead of coming up with new features and new exciting ways to integrate with other kinds of implementations, or some amazing fancy new thing that's going to blow them away over in SharePoint land, or whatever it is you're planning to do, you wind up taking developers and putting them onto bug patrol. Somebody else's bug patrol. So why is it like this? The PDF specification has changed over time. Nobody's fault, it's just a fact of the matter. 1.0 wasn't the be-all and end-all, didn't solve all the needs. Neither did 1.1 or 1.2 or 1.3. So it's changed over time, and some PDF files were created back in the day. And not only has the specification changed, but the terms of the specification have changed. The language has become tighter. So this is there are cases where back in the day it might have been reasonable to interpret PDF in one particular kind of way. It's much less reasonable to interpret it that way now. The specification is not always completely straightforward. So as a result, not everybody's interpretation of the specification is identical, and this, of course, results in software that's not equally capable. As a result of these factors, invalid, incapable, or marginal files and software are out there in the real world. They're causing errors. They're triggering. They're resulting in data loss. People are sending one document from A to B, and they're not able to deal with it over on the receiving end. It doesn't happen very much, but it happens enough, as we've seen, since end users are clearly they experience this, that it causes our industry to slow down. What could we do about this? Validation, in principle, would detect problems in authoring software in PDF files themselves, and the advancement of the idea of validation would tend to foster software that meets the specification and does a good job. Why is it time to address this issue? It's been fairly pointed out, and that the right time for PDF validation, even if it wasn't going to happen right at the outset, I mean, then it'd be probably unreasonable to expect the developer of PDF to come out of the egg with a validator alongside of the initial release. But about 10 years ago, or perhaps a little longer, 12 years ago or so, before PDFA, it was much more of a wild world out there. There were a lot more PDF generators that did a lot of crazy things compared to the way it is today. And PDFA has had an interesting effect on the industry in the sense that a lot of PDF generators have even if they don't support PDFA, they felt impelled by the fact that PDFA existed to spend some more time on the subject of reliability. But the reason that is it still time today is a fair question. It's now 10 years on. PDFA has been around for a while, and many software do a much better job. But there are other factors out there, quite apart from whether or not the files themselves and the generators themselves today are so great. That are driving us, I believe, towards the need for a validator. These variations in quality, software quality, and software capability continue to retard the adoption of PDF in ECM systems. So this means that it's, if you develop a library, if you ship a viewer, other kinds of processors, the chances you're going to sell that to General Motors are a lot less than they would otherwise be. if PDF was understood to be fully valid. If the ECM systems that General Motors installed and operated were systems that did smart things with annotations or fields or digital signatures or watermarking or anything else that you can do with a PDF file. PDF A1 and PDF A2, while being revolutionary in the sense of being able to fundamentally address reliability problems in PDF files, are nonetheless the wrong way to approach the problem of PDF validation in general, because they're not oriented that direction. They're oriented towards archival functions. They don't permit security. PDFA is there's no JavaScript permitted in PDFA. It's simply inappropriate for many important use cases for PDF. Many of the new subset standards, and our print industry folks are less interested in this point because the print industry still is up to about maybe 1.6 so far as I'm aware. But the other kinds of subsets, PDFVT, PDFE, PDFE2, that is, the new PDFE, PDFUA, PDFA2, PDFA3, these all use ISO 32000 Part 1. 32000 Part 2, and this shocks some when they come to, who've been used to having the PDF reference as a free download forever. PDF 2.0, at this present point in time, ISO 32000 Part 2, is not going to be a free download. That may change. I'm not sure how it will change. There's some movement afoot actually within the PDF Association to try and work out a way to make it happen. But for the present point in time, you would have to pay money to get a hold of ISO 32000 Part 2. And one of my great concerns is that this will retard adoption, and that one of the important ways to be able to improve that state of affairs would be a validator. If we go down the road of validation, the 32000 Part 1 validator would probably be important to develop before 32000 Part 2, if only because it's going to be quite some number of years before we even see 32000 Part 2 as a major feature in the world. And lastly, why else might it be time? Governments, as you may have noticed, are on a kick to adopt ISO standards for many technologies that they procure. And this is they've certainly shown their cards in this regard with respect to the accessibility world, something I'm more familiar with. But I think increasingly you're going to find governments are insisting upon ISO standardized technologies for the kinds of things that they consider to be core business interests. So how could a validator help? There are many different potential benefits in PDF validation. Immediate and independent feedback mechanism can help drive software QA. So if you produce yourself a file, and instead of having Adobe Reader to open it up and not tell you anything other than it appears to display in Adobe Reader, a piece of software that told you in specific technical detail what was the matter with your file would give you a great QA mechanism to help train developers and to help every kind of developer understand what they're doing right, what they're doing wrong. As I've already mentioned, developers would benefit because a validator would help move development time from problems to product enhancement. It would provide, from the point of view of the marketing and sales folks, it would provide independent confirmation that an unreadable file was invalid. One of my friends in the print industry is extremely excited about this aspect. They're in the business, of course, of receiving files from the whole world all the time and sending them into print production software. They would love to be able to say to their customers, now wait a second, your file wasn't so good, and let me prove it to you if you go ahead and point it at this website out here that everybody in the world believes is the definition of a good PDF. It's not me telling you that it's a bad file, it's the industry telling you it's a bad file. And that would be of some help to some people some of the time in terms of dealing with their customers. Obviously, not every customer and not all the time. To trim support loads and encourage customer self-support if there are more ways to clearly and comprehensively identify a file as being invalid. That would be one benefit. Real-world validation would become eventually separated from Adobe Reader. So that instead of using this tool, which really can't offer you a validation at all, we might be able to change that state of affairs. If we had a clear and broad-based understanding of valid PDF, it might enable products, more vendors to be able to authoritatively transcode PDF from old bad PDF into new PDF. It might help constrain vectors from malicious PDF files. If it was possible to comprehensively validate a PDF, one would be in better shape in principle for investigating the data structures within a PDF to find out if there was something nasty in there. There would be the prospect of encouraged customer adoption, ensuring the future of the technology. Once customers began to really believe that a PDF was a technology that no one company owned, that the truest assertion of what was a good PDF was not whether or not a certain company's viewer displayed it, but whether or not it got a thumbs up from the official industry validator. That would be something that is something that all governments and all major corporations who purchase our software and services, they would like to see that. And I believe that a PDF validator or a serious PDF validator project would serve in a different way, energizing the open source development of open source validation for all kinds of objects. Many, of course, which happen in a PDF, and some of these are font programs, but others are images or are XMP. All kinds of possibilities for validation of non-PDF objects that are otherwise required in PDF. So there would be options to reduce support costs would be important. Everybody, of course, wants to know, why would I bother sending my engineering organization to donate some of their time to maybe help work on an open source validator project? Those folks, those business people, need to have some answers to the questions, why is this worth our trouble to do this, right? And one can only speak about this in terms of if this validator existed. If there is a product, an end result to the effort to develop a validator, our customer support folks would have a new option for dealing with the support inquiries that they get. They could, for example, send their files that the customers send in that have problems. They could ask those customers to instead send those files, throw those files against a server. A third-party server would be able to tell them what was wrong with those files and whether or not it was actually that particular vendor's problem. End users would therefore be readily, or in many cases, they would be redirected to the true source of their problem. They would, in any case, be educated to some degree, greater, lesser. Nobody will be educated to a perfect degree, but the options for education, the options for expanded understanding and awareness of the problems would go up. I see here I've left a bullet which referred to a different iteration of this slideshow. And I'm going to mention the idea of a SaaS in a minute, but in principle, if you imagine a validator sitting on the web as a SaaS that had the ability to forward files on a customer's opt-in to the PDF producer, there are a variety of possibilities may emerge for, in some cases, fixing an existing broken file and returning it to the end user. So end users, in principle, if PDF were to be validatable, if validation engines were available to IT managers, to software developers, possibly to end users would see reduced costs, improved interoperability. Fundamental, I think, to the idea of potential growth in the PDF industry is the idea of deeper implementation of PDF features in ECM systems. From my point of view, the Documentums, the FileNets of this world really ought to be able to handle the metadata of a PDF. If I have an annotation on a PDF file, I would quite like for that annotation to be indexed in those kinds of systems. And these are things that would happen more and more if those companies started to believe that they own PDF just as much as anybody else does. So let's talk a little bit about a concept that has the name for the moment of Vera PDF. Is a moniker, as if you will, for a notional validator that might exist out there in space and serve all of us. First premise of a industry authored, shall we say, validator would be to design for industry acceptance. From the ground up, such a project should be oriented around the needs of adoption, to promote adoption by implementers. So I've proposed, for example, that the Vera PDF concept be a component of the PDF Association, this being the most likely and most obvious place for a validator project to exist in a third-party space. So perhaps if one designs for industry acceptance, starting here would be the right spot for it. Project mechanisms, policies, priorities, conflict resolution, and everything managed by an elected steering committee within that component to make sure that everybody in the association understands that they have just as much right to step up and play and to involve themselves with the question of a validator as anybody else. And then manage the project with, we need obviously a software engineer to manage a project. We also need somebody who has it as their business to promote the project, to make sure that the idea of the validator is well described, well exposed, gets coverage in various places. They promote it to customers, they promote it to the government, they even promote it to the media. Now, back to the the fascinating technical stuff. Remember, I'm not a developer. Where do we start with a validator? Where do we stop? This is, to a degree, some of the stuff that Francois and Leonard were talking about earlier. And I will not speak to this in great technical detail, except to sort of generally speaking, wave at the problem and acknowledge it. So as Leonard rightly pointed out, there are four major components of any PDF: the header, the body, the XREF, and the trailer. And there are, as his presentation pointed out, a wide variety of different text and binary types of content within the body of a PDF. And one could take the view that a validator is something that processes all of this stuff all at once and gives you kind of a thumbs up or a thumbs down at the end. That's a sort of very basic, straightforward view. Other ideas would involve processing the syntax in the body and offering some sort of information based upon the results of that. That's probably very useful from the point of view of helping developers build the most efficient PDF files possible. But, for example, that wouldn't help you deal with the problem of fonts. There are a variety of possibilities. There are probably, how many different grammars could you develop to support the various components of this thing? A dozen or two, right? An awful lot of work, and the priority of the work, the sequence of it is an interesting question. What do we want this thing to do first? Does it need to address syntax validation first? Do we need to instead try and attack the biggest end user problem first? What should a validator cover at all? Is basic integrity of the file the fundamental question? Is our content streams, the functions, shading, maybe fonts are the single biggest issue? And if so, what are we going to do with them? Is there anything that we can do to remediate this sort of problem, or are we simply left in limbo saying, gee, what you've done with your fonts means that there's nothing searchable here, or I can't reproduce this text at all, however it works. So there are enormous number, and then after all, PDF can also include audio and video, 3D objects. There's really, some constraints are probably appropriate up front in terms of the project. One would have to understand that it's going to have a certain scope and not a different scope. And there's an enormous range of potential areas to go into with PDF. And this will be one of the fundamental questions that such a project would have to answer. Who are the users of this thing? Should it emerge, right? So we've talked about developers. This all depends, again, as the project is further explored and further defined. It may not be obvious, or it may not even be a good idea at all for a validator to be a product that goes in front of end users. Maybe end users should never know. Maybe it should be a developer-only tool that's hosted, that's available to people who are willing to go get something off of SourceForge. There are all kinds of possibilities. Maybe it's something that, maybe it's instead software that's built, it's delivered as a sort of an API without a user interface. It would be appropriate for IT managers to plug into their network implementations so that they can process and examine PDF files when they enter their system. Maybe once at a certain level of maturity, procurement authorities are going to be encouraged or should be encouraged to develop policies that would tend to require conforming validated PDF files, or PDF files that meet the Vera PDF specification for quality or some such. There are a variety of different possibilities, and it would lean very heavily upon the organizers and developers of this sort of a validator to come up with the appropriate inroad for this concept in the user space. So, one simple opportunity, not simple at all, but one opportunity for a validator that certainly occurred to me would be to develop software as a service to run up there on the cloud, to provide end users with high quality information about their files and potentially help them address fixes with their files. So imagine, if you will, there's a server out there, and this screenshot will give you the idea is you simply load up your file and send it to the server. You might check a box. Well, let's start with, so you send your file up to the server, and this being a third-party server, not associated with any particular vendor, you might, in principle, depending upon how the website's developed, who is sponsoring, who's supporting this thing, you might get the idea that the user might be inspired to send their file to this thing to find out if the file is good or not. If it's broken, they might be able to get a response that comes to them in different levels of interest, right? If you're a developer, you check the box, so give me a programmatically usable representation of my problem. If I'm an IT manager, give me the IT manager level issue, which was, this problem is, this file is missing, it's not got embedded fonts and should be returned to the producer, maybe the IT manager's response. And then user might get a different message as well. Your file's broken and has to be remade. There are all kinds of possibilities for managing the kinds of information that would be returned to users based upon the nature of the file they uploaded. Similarly, if there may also be an option in such a system to allow the SAS to forward the file to the PDF's producer or possibly modifier, that is to say the vendor, maybe one of you, so that you would, and you would, as part of your affiliation with this validator, you would agree, or you would be part of what you wanted to do. Nobody would force anything on anybody else. But the idea would be that when people test their files against the server, and if they turn out to have a problem according to the server, the file might come to you. It might be useful for testing purposes. It might be useful for in aiding in helping you figure out problems with the software, and it might even be possible to return fixes to the end user. Wrong slide. I'll get to that point in a second. Okay, a point that everybody, whenever I talk about this, everybody who's a developer, that is, nobody else, but everyone who's a developer always wants to know whether or not this validator is going to be built with C or Java. That seems to be the big subject. And I go, I don't know, whichever you guys like. But it's very evident to me that it shouldn't exclude one or the other. And so, so in terms of thinking about how to approach the subject, just as PDF itself is, as part of its mantra is platform independence, it's probably something that should be a target for a validator as well. Even if it is going to increase the complexity, even if it's going to make the architecture of such a thing more and more challenging to do, it's going to massively increase the scope of interest in it if we don't decide from the outset that we're going to exclude all the Java developers or exclude all the C++ developers. Yeah, good luck with that. There are several approaches, as I understand it, and I'm no expert in the subject, but there are several approaches to validation in a way that is in principle platform independent. One of them might be a table-based approach, in which there's a series of right answers and wrong answers in a table, and you get to go ask a table and receive your answer, and if your answer is equivalent, then you're in good shape. A second approach would be to architect the thing such that for any given module, it was also in principle possible to build. It was designed, as it were, from the outset, such that for any given module in any given platform, C++, for example, you would also have the facility to develop an equivalent module using a different platform, and then have those two modules, as it were, fight it out. All right. Do they both validate the same way? Do they both give the same answer? If they don't, that's also very interesting. Probably we should be looking at one or the other or both of them to figure that out. And if we have two of them operating at the same time in the same way, producing the same result, then we're probably getting a whole lot more confident about the kind of answer they can deliver. So, as I mentioned earlier, I had this thought for one of the, as an end user, I tend to try and think of how this stuff could work for end users out there. And I thought to myself, the single biggest thing that would be that end users could get out of a validator that sat out there on the web, that was independent, third party, and had the kind of potential that the genuine third party independent validator might have, because I might trust it. If I was the end user and I have a broken file, a file that doesn't work for me, and I upload this file to the SaaS, it gets scanned, and I get a response which is, your file is broken. I might then say, well, I might tell the server to go ahead and to go ahead and forward that file to the producer, in order that certainly to forward a report of the problem to the producer, absent any of the file data. That's one thing, but optionally to forward the file itself to the producer, with the idea that if it's an option for them, that they would have the opportunity to try and fix it and send it back to me. This may or may not be possible in many cases. Perhaps it won't be, but of course it may be, right? So it's unclear to me at this point how many opportunities there would be to correct bad PDF files once they've been created, and maybe there are very few, in which case this idea is not going to go very far. But it is, in any event, it's an opportunity to collect data from the real world about real files that are happening. That's probably useful for development. It's an opportunity to, if these things are reparable, to create to create a real save with the customer. If a customer has a situation where they send off a PDF and instead of characters on the page, they're just little blocks, and what they get back is a PDF file with actual characters on the page, they're going to be very happy with the developer who helped them solve their broken PDF file. So how should a validator deploy to the world? We were discussing this a little bit earlier, but these are questions for you. This is not something about which I'm going to be telling you about. Is it purely and simply a developer's tool, as I've mentioned? Is it a runtime runtime concept that Francois has been talking about? Is it something that should go into end user software at all? Maybe, maybe not. We already don't really want to encourage users to believe that PDF files could be bad, even though the real world experience of many users is that, in fact, some PDF files are bad. Perhaps it's as I've mentioned, as I suggested, it's a publicly accessible SaaS that has that essentially is there to give you high quality, what's the matter with my file kind of information, or possibly to route that file onto the producer or some other developer who will be able to fix it for you and send it back. Perhaps it's something that isn't deployed as a piece of software that end users would want to touch at all. Maybe it's just an API that's that can be dropped into a content management system, or can be dropped into a network gateway so that PDF files can be tested on entry, for example. Perhaps there should be a PDF police force, right? Perhaps there should be, perhaps part of the purpose of this system, existing and operating as it does as a third-party entity, perhaps as a unit of the PDF Association, is to be able to publish statistics about the files that it finds, right? To put up a list of this many broken files. I expect these sort of things to be very controversial, probably deeply unpopular, probably never happen. But there are a variety of possibilities for deploying this information, which could, under various circumstances, under various levels of acceptability, drive bad PDF producers who make sloppy PDF files to improve their software or tend to exit the industry. It's really up to you. I don't have I merely have an investment in the idea of bad PDF going away, and that the reality, the promise of a global electronic document format that is PDF, that will have the opportunity to be with us forever and service us in the way that it does, preserving a record of a document, frozen at a particular moment in time. But I don't know if it's going to happen. Could it drive PDF's future? Could independent PDF validation drive PDF's future? Yeah, I think it could, because by helping anything that eliminates the perception that it's owned by a particular company, anything that eliminates the perception that PDF has any sort of problems with reliability, and anything that makes PDF as technology easier to get into, easier to exchange, is something that will drive its adoption and implementation by the various ECM vendors, many of whom spill more than drinks than the PDF industry is worth all year. right? So it would be of tremendous value, I think, to this industry to think very hard about the potential for a PDF validator. Could it make PDF files more secure? Could it make the whole, like, the virus thing go away? Could it encourage adoption of these many features in PDF that are lying about, pretty much unused? What about optional content, for example? Almost nobody uses it. What about tags? Almost nobody uses them yet. These things are potentially much more interesting as a function of the people's perception that the technology is something that they can get into far more easily than they can get into today. And a validator would help to drive that. Any questions? Olaf's bringing your microphone.
Just carry over the microphone.
Just wondering, to what extent, if the Adobe Acrobat pre-flight tools were made available as a service, to what extent would that solve a lot of these problems? And is that
If the what was made available?
it's a big if, sorry.
If what was made available?
The Adobe Acrobat pre-flight tools, the various validation checkers and syntax checkers that are actually in there. I'm just wondering whether there's any opportunity for Adobe to assist there. But what I'm not clear on is to what extent the full range of pre-flight tools actually address all these issues. They obviously will address quite a lot of them. So I know that technology is already there.
So there are, well, not just within Adobe, but many companies produce various kinds of validation tools. Many of them are oriented towards PDFA, but not exclusively. And you're right, the pre-flight, to the extent that it's about validation, I'm going to be corrected here momentarily if I get this wrong, but characteristically, most of the validation functionality in pre-flight is about PDFA, I believe.
Or about the various PDF standards.
About the subset standards. There is a PDF syntax checker in PDFA in pre-flight, which I believe is an implementation of TVA.
Correct.
There you have it. So, could these things be exposed in a different way? Possibly they could. Whether or not that would, but these are right now Adobe technologies, right? So from the perception point of view, it probably wouldn't help that much. From a technical point of view, certainly the syntax checker would address syntax questions, but not so much the font problem, not so much other kinds of objects, which can cause various kinds of issues, bad images or whatever.
Yeah, so just to follow up on that, so the pre-flight tool in Acrobat has various things that it does, one of which is syntax checking, and as Duff said, it sits on top of the grammar that Adobe has contributed to the ISO. So we very specifically have been working towards that goal, so that people can leverage that same technology in terms of the grammar check. So we do think that's the right direction. We're not turning the code over, but we're giving you everything else except the actual processing code, which is the hard part. I mean, there are lots of PDF readers out there already. You just really need to know what to check against, and that's there now.
So I have to add here that having implemented pre-flight as CAS software, I know a few things about it. The core of the engine in pre-flight is the same as the core engine in our PDF Toolbox implementation. So everything minus DVA can also be found in the PDF Toolbox, and we license it to you any way you want, as long as you pay what we want from you. But you can have it in a number of ways. And it includes some syntax checking. It's not as complete as DVA, it's more specific, driven by some of the subset standards. So we do check offsets and the form of dictionaries and this and that in a number of ways. So it's useful, it's not complete in that regard. So it might be a starting point, but just to fill you in on this one. Any other questions or remarks?
If you sell knives, people can use them to cut vegetables, that's good. People can use them to cut their fingers, that's bad. Now, if you have a toolbox that allows you to do things with PDF, for instance, turn a page that is in landscape into seascape, for instance, by changing 90 into 270 in the page dictionary. People can also use that toolbox to have a page dictionary with a rotate angle of 45, and that would not be correct. have a page like this. Now, who are you going to blame? The user or the toolbox? I hope the user. And also, how are you going to know who is the person who introduced that angle of 45 degrees? Because there's no obligation that tools put their name into the producer line. And also, it could be that a PDF is originally produced by Adobe, then post-processed by some crappy software, and are you going to blame Adobe because that's in the producer line, or the crappy software that didn't leave its traces?
Right.
Or the end viewer that doesn't display it at 45 degrees like they wanted it to.
Right. So not all of the answers to many of the important questions are to be found in the specification. We already know that. And that's part of the subject that you're raising, as I understand it. It's nonetheless, and a validator is not just, or doesn't need to be only a validator, in the sense that it's also, once it's a place that people use and respect as a source of authoritative information about how to implement the specification, it's also a good space for other information that helps people guide people towards doing the right thing in various kinds of circumstances. So if one acquires a lot of cache as a vital place to go just to get your PDF file syntactically correct, you're also more likely to be able to use that place, that resource, to learn about the other kinds of things that you shouldn't do, even though they're not prohibited in the specification. Will that stop anybody doing the kinds of things you're talking about? No. Will it make it easier to identify the problem, to help identify people who are doing the thing incorrectly, and then therefore to help perhaps pressure them to do the right thing? Yeah.
A problem I have is that there are companies who use our product and they are doing wrong things about it with it. They are not customers, but we get all the complaints.
So if you say we are going to have a validator and we are going to send PDFs to the culprits, then I'm sure that I'm going to get a lot of PDFs, and I'm not the culprit. It's the non-paying customers, the non-paying users who are. So that's kind of.
Better go to you than to me, bro. I got nothing.
So you're quite right. I mean, the mechanic, whether or not the idea that files would be forwarded in a way that the users, for example, let's say that they, if the SAS if there's a SAS, people are able to throw their files against it, and if there's a checkbox that can your file be used to research the kind of problem that we've discovered, right? That's one kind of message which doesn't create any pressure on you. If the file comes to you, they have no idea what happened to it. They've simply, the user has permitted their file to be used for research to solve the problem in general, right? This is input to a development process, just like any other bad file might be. Nobody's accusing you, nobody's pointing a finger. There's another way to go, and the whole politics and the whole feeling of the thing would change completely if the checkbox on the SAS said, forward my broken file to the guy who produced it. Then all kinds of nightmares are going to happen to you, right? Because people will start to, oh, yeah, I see that you told me my file is produced by iText. I know who that guy is. Let me go jump on him. And that wouldn't be so great. So and this is, I guess, part of, it's a very good question you raised. Getting a validator right, the more power, the more acceptance a validator has, the more vitally important it is to get the feeling of it, to get the politics of the discussion of the validator correct. And it would be a nightmare in the industry if we created a situation where people wanted the tool in principle, but the implementation of it in terms of the text in the dialogue caused everybody to great dismay and pain. That would be really, really bad. On the other hand, the premise, which is, here are files that are broken out there in the real world, and this is interesting data for a development process. I believe that premise is reasonably accurate.
So I think you might be taking it already one step too far. There's always going to be people that don't care what they do and that misuse whatever tool you give them. However, I think there are a lot of developers that are very honestly trying to do the right thing, except that doing the right thing as far as PDF is concerned is far from trivial. And it's far from trivial even to figure out whether you're doing the right thing. So if you're in the business of generating PDF files with a library or completely by yourself, it's far from easy to figure out whether your files will actually behave correctly in all circumstances. And that is partly because Acrobat or Reader are so good at interpreting whatever you throw at it. So it's not because it opens in Reader that it's going to open correctly in any other tool that I will not name. But it's not trivial, and a validator would already help with that. So all of those people that are trying to write correct code would be, I think, helped by having a tool that they can throw their files at and that will tell them exactly what might not work. Even without going through all the trouble of trying to blame someone. It's not so much about blame. I think a lot of it will just be volume. I mean, if you have a service where anyone can throw files at and say, you can use this for research purposes, who's going to look at all those things and decide why they're not good and what should be done about it? That's not trivial either.
It's not trivial, and yet once one's gone down the road of developing a validator and placing it in that position, characterizing the broken files that show up, generating statistics about them, being able to report to a vendor that of the 43 PDF files collected that were produced by your software, 18 of them had this kind of problem, 2 had this kind of problem, and so on. I have no idea what data would actually come out, and I don't care to predict immediately that it would be something that people would want to jump on and incorporate into their development process. But it would help, it seems to me, or it gives you the option. It will give you many more options that simply don't exist today at all.
I have one additional question. Have you looked at projects actually doing this kind of stuff or wanting to do this kind of stuff?
I've not had a lot of luck finding them.
There is one that you should look at. It's called Jove.
Jove, yes. No, I'm well aware of Jove. The Jove folk, I've spoken to them. They would like this project to take over.
Okay. Because it looked like it's doing or it wanted to do the same thing. It also looks very limited.
But Jove is one guy. Yeah. One guy trying to cover 16 formats or something.
Well, there is a Jove too that has a whole list of people from Stanford and some other places, at least on the website.
Yep, that's true.
I think a lot of the ideas you put forward in your presentation are very interesting. Also, that includes, of course, the SaaS validator service for anybody to use. But given the fact that the idea is to have it as an open source thing, I guess most uses will come from a lot of people and in-house development groups using it in-house.
Right.
And that will be probably the most, that will give the most value to it. It's just like the W3 thing, the HTML validator. There's a command line tool, HTML tidy, which is used by thousands of developers, just in-house or privately, and they never bothered to use the SaaS, which is also available there. So probably for any other or any PDF writing tool or PDF creating software, once the validator was there, they will most likely use it, because nobody will want to blame, to get the blames from their own customers that it doesn't even validate, because each customer could use it. So I don't think the concerns you are having are so much
then you should rather present it as a unit testing or a testing tool, because when you change one tiny thing in your program, you can screw up a complete file, and so you the percent that needs to be the first byte that you only find it out afterwards. A validator could be a good
a first step towards a validator could be like a unit testing module that you can, that every company can use when they produce invoices, for instance, and they produce 100 million of invoices a year. They could kind of, in their testing environment, add this unit testing validator to see not only if the PDF is correct, but maybe also check some data in the invoice. I don't know if that's another project, but that could be one approach.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we have to begin to wrap up this
Yep.
presentation, so we can still get some coffee. We used up 50 minutes already of the coffee break.
Imagine you need it at this
You
point.
will have to hurry now to get your cup. Thanks again to Duff for
Thank you,
showing
everyone.
his talk today.